Everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the first day of Tech Ed. Hope you guys are having fun and have seen good stuff so far and are going to see a whole bunch of good stuff this week. My name is Robert Green, and I'm a technical evangelist at Microsoft. And in this talk, you're going to see how to build business applications with Visual Studio LightSwitch. And before we begin, let me ask, how many in here have never used LightSwitch? And the vast majority of the hands that go up, excellent. You're all in the right place. How many of you would consider yourselves developers? That's your main primary job function, developer. About half. IT? Not as, okay. A few. And the rest of you are somewhere in between. Okay, perfect. We are all in the right place. That's always good. Okay, so like I said, we're going to see in this talk how to build business applications with LightSwitch. LightSwitch is a new product in the Visual Studio family that is currently in Beta 2 and will be shipping this calendar year. And whenever any new product or technology comes out of Microsoft, and Lord knows there are a lot of those, I think you want to ask yourselves a couple of questions. And the first question is, what is this? And then more importantly, what problem is it trying to solve? Because once you understand the problem that the product or technology is trying to solve, then you have a much better sense of whether you can use it, and if you can, how you can use it. And so in this talk, you're going to see what LightSwitch is, you're going to see the problem it's trying to solve, and then throughout the demos, you're going to come to your own conclusion on how well a job it does, and obviously I'm hoping the answer is extremely well. So what is LightSwitch? LightSwitch is the simplest way to create business applications for the desktop and the cloud. And that begs the question, do we really need another way to build business applications for the desktop and the cloud? LightSwitch is not another way of building applications for the desktop and the cloud. It is the simplest way to create business applications for the desktop and the cloud. So what's the problem it's trying to solve? Why do we need the simplest way to create applications, business applications for the desktop and the cloud? Well, consider this scenario. A branch manager needs an application. She wants to gain control of the hardware budget. She needs to know how many computers they have, who's got what computer, what printers do they have, how much are they spending on cartridges a month, all that kind of information. She needs an app. So she calls corporate IT, and she asks the IT guy, can you build this app for me? And the IT guy says, boy, I'd love to be able to build that app for you, but I don't have time, and sorry. Now, the IT guy hangs up knowing that the branch manager is going to go build this app, and that there's a good chance that this winds up on his lap as a disaster sometime later on, but he's busy. So he hangs up the phone, and then the branch manager, as we would all predict, builds the application. And she hands it to these two, who are clearly models. But when they're not sashaying down the runway, it turns out, interestingly, that they're also what we'll call end-user developers. And by end-user developers, we mean people who are not full-time developers, but they do some development as part of their job. Information workers, business analysts, sometimes they're in IT. There's a lot of names, a lot of categorizing we can do for these people, but we're going to call them end-user developers. They can build an application. The branch manager turns to these two and says, build me this application, and they go off and they do. What are they going to build it in? I don't know, maybe Excel. There's a number of other tools they might use. They build the application. Fast forward 6 months. The branch manager is a hero because of this application, she has increased profit, reduced cost, while maintaining efficiency. She is now the star of the corporation, of the entire bank. Corporate VP gets a hold of this, calls the IT guy. The same guy who 6 months ago couldn't build the app for her says, go get that app and deploy it to all 378 branches worldwide by the end of the month. Oh, snap, right? This is a very common scenario. Now, what's this IT guy supposed to do? He has to get this application. He has no idea what it's written in. Is it even something that can be deployed, assuming it was written well? It's kind of a nightmare. So in a better world, I won't say a perfect world, I won't even say an ideal world, but in a better world, ideally in a better world, what would we have these end users use to build this application? What do end user developers want? And more importantly, what tool do we wish they had to go out and build applications like this? Well, we would like them to have something that provides a smooth on-ramp to development. So something that they can get up to speed very quickly on. We would like it to have built-in plumbing to handle the common application tasks, such as connecting to data, retrieving data, modifying data, displaying error messages, validating and displaying error messages, creating screens, popping up menus, basically doing everything in the application other than the specific business logic that only the end user developers can write. All the rest of that plumbing stuff, wouldn't it be great if the tool did that for them? And then we would also want them to have a tool that provides a simple and flexible deployment. And by flexible, I mean something that is easily deployed within the branch, and then something that could then be deployed worldwide. So in other words, what we wish they had was a simple tool to build the well-architected applications that we professional developers would have built for them in the first place if we had the time. And LightSwitch aims to be that. That's the problem that LightSwitch is trying to solve. Now, the professional developers in the audience say, that sounds cool, I want one of those too. Because if the branch manager comes to me as a professional developer or you as a professional developer and says, hey, I got a project for you, can you build this application for me? We'd like to be able to do that. Or, coming back to our scenario, the branch manager calls the corporate vice president and says, I need this application, who marches down to IT and says, go build that application for her, but by the way, don't let the schedule slip on any of the other projects you're working on. Wouldn't it be nice if the IT guy could go to one of the developers on staff and say, here's something that you could build this application very, very quickly. You should be able to bang this out in a couple of days. It's not going to take 6 months of architecting and a 27-person crew to build this application to manage computer assets. With a tool like LightSwitch, in our ideal world, you ought to be able to go bang that application out very quickly and know that you've built a well-architected application that does what it's supposed to do and then can be deployed across the company. Now, for professional developers, that would be a nice tool to have in their toolbox. If you have an MSDN subscription, then you get LightSwitch as part of that. It installs right into Visual Studio, and then you could open up an existing LightSwitch application and extend it, or you could build a LightSwitch application yourself from scratch. So we talk about 3 phases to the LightSwitch development experience. Start is where you describe your data and create screens for common tasks. Looking for customers, searching, creating new customers, creating new orders, etc. LightSwitch is all about data and screens. So you point to your data, you create some screens so you can view and work with your data. Then in the refine stage, you'll author business logic to do validations. You can build more advanced screens and customize the screens that you have. And you can also write your own queries. So show me all computers that are owned by employees that have been here more than 5 years, where the computers are more than 3 years old, that type of thing. And then in the extend phase, you can use outside components. So in our demo, we're going to use a Bing map control so that we can map customers. Now, we're not going to write that control, we're just going to acquire it. I happen to have it sitting on my laptop. We're going to get that control, install it, and then use it in the application. So everything outside this triangle, this dashed triangle, is something that both end-user developers and professional developers can do. All of these pieces so far require just LightSwitch. And that's what we're going to talk about in this talk. Inside the dashed box are things you can do if you also have Visual Studio. So you can create your own Silverlight controls and then use those in a LightSwitch application if you want more control over the UI or you have some specific needs in the UI that you want. You can also integrate with custom data sources so you can build RIA services and connect to just about anything. We're not going to talk about those in this talk. Beth Massey has a talk. I believe it's on Wednesday. I have it in the resources at the end of the deck, where she's going to talk about the more advanced scenarios. We're going to stick to the stuff that end-user developers do. Okay, so with that, let's build a LightSwitch application. And we're going to build it from scratch. And I'm going to build an application that is used by the sales reps at a training company. So we have customers, we have training courses, and then the customers place orders. Okay, and I've got Visual Studio Ultimate installed. I wanted to have just LightSwitch on my machine, but I ran into some issues that I won't bore you with the details. But I'm not going to do anything in here that requires anything outside of LightSwitch. So I start up Visual Studio, I create a new project, and if I have LightSwitch, the only thing I'll see is a VB LightSwitch application and a C# LightSwitch application. I won't have any of the rest of these templates. So I basically just decide the language I'm going to use, and I'm going to use VB for today, and I'm going to call it Training Courses, and I'm going to store it in my TechEd folder, and I click OK. First question LightSwitch comes up and says is, where's your data? Two types of data. Existing corporate assets, maybe sitting in a SQL Server database somewhere, or we're going to create tables from scratch because the data doesn't currently exist. For our scenario, we're going to start off with existing data, and then later on we'll create additional tables. So I'm going to attach to an external data source, and I have three choices: a database like SQL Server, SharePoint data, or a WCF RIA service. So some middle tier RIA service that goes off and talks to data. Now, in all likelihood, the end user developers don't really know what a WCF RIA service is, but that's okay. They do know what a database is. They do know what SharePoint is. So I'll select database, click next, and all I got to do is enter the name of the database server, come down here, and select Training Courses. That's the SQL Server database sitting somewhere out on the network that we're going to use. LightSwitch connects to it, brings back a list of tables, and I want courses, customers, and orders. I'll select all of them and click Finish. LightSwitch goes out, reads the definitions of those, and in my Solution Explorer shows me the three tables or entities, and they're in the Training Courses data source. So this is my SQL Server data. Okay? So let's look at customers first. This is a table, or it's an entity in real life behind the scenes. It's an entity using the entity framework, but for our purposes, we can call it a table. That's fine. It's customer. We've got customer ID and the usual stuff. Now, customer ID, I'm going to drag this window out and put it here because I'm going to use it fairly often. Okay, so now there's a customer ID. I don't want to see this. I don't care if a particular customer is customer number 43. That's meaningless to me. So I'm going to uncheck display by default. We've got name, address, the usual stuff. Now notice that most of the data in here is a string, including phone number, fax, and email. But it's going to be a string, but I can format it. I can choose one of the built-in custom data types. So I'm going to choose phone number for the phone number field, and I'm going to choose phone number for the fax, and I'm going to say that this email should be an email address. And then we're going to see later on that this gives me some built-in validation and some built-in UI formatting. And I can see that there's a one-to-many between customers and orders. That's defined in the SQL Server database. That comes down as we would expect. Let's open up courses. At least in Beta 2, LightSwitch doesn't singularize courses correctly. It calls it a course. So I'll just change that to course. Don't really care to see the course ID. And the price is a decimal. I don't have to deal with decimals. It's dollars and cents. So I'm going to select the built-in money data type, which will only show me two decimal places, cents. And then for release date and retired date, SQL Server stores these as a date time. I really don't care what time the course was released, right? I care what day it was released, what day it was retired, but I don't really need to know the time, so I'm going to set these to date. And then for release date, I'm going to come over here to display name and say when this appears on screens, just make the label released. And for retired, just make the label retired. So I can control that at the entity level. And then for orders, I do need to see the order ID because that's important. The date, order date should be a date, price should be money, and the date of the actual course that's being ordered should be a date. Okay, so that's my data. Now I want to create a screen. I can either click Screen in the Data Designer. I can come over to the Solution Explorer, right-click Screens, and add a screen. Both of those work. And LightSwitch comes with 5 built-in screen types. Screens for viewing a single entity. That's a detail screen, so I want to view a customer and order. An editable grid if I want to be able to edit a collection all in a grid. A list in detail, which would show me a list of items and then details on them, so a list of customers and their orders. A screen for creating new data, new order, new customer. And then a search screen, which will show me a list of something, and then I can drill down on one of those. So I'm going to start my application by creating a search data screen for customers. The first screen I create is automatically the default screen when the application starts. I can, of course, change that later on. But I'm going to have the application come up and show me a list of customers. And I'm going to call this customer list. Now I'll click OK. And here is my screen designer. On the left are my data items. This is the data I'm looking at. I've got some built-in commands, close, refresh, save. And then in the middle, a hierarchical list of the controls on the screen. Now I know that all I want to do here is see customers, and then I'll select one and drill down, so I don't need most of this information. I don't need address. I do want city, don't want region, postal code, country. I do want phone number, but if I accidentally delete it, then I can just come over here, drag it back in. Perfect. Save this, run it. Let's see what happens. Application builds, application loads. Here's my customer list. Here are my customers from SQL Server. Notice the company names are underlined. And if I click on one, like Coho Winery, I go out and retrieve the information on that customer, come back in. Built into the application is some searching. So if I type lit, I can see litware. If I type Robert, I'll see customers with Robert in there. If I want to just filter out by Redmond, I can do that. If I want to see everybody, I clear the filter, and I can export this list to Excel. Okay, assuming I have Excel installed, of course. Okay, now, if I come back here, this says company name right here. This says contact name. I really want this to say customers in contact. Now, in ordinary development, I'd have to close the application, go back in the development environment, open up the screen, make the change, rerun it over and over and over again. LightSwitch is designed to be a little bit more iterative. I can click, if I'm running in debug mode, so if I'm a developer testing the application, I can click Design Screen, and while the application's running, I can make changes to it. So I'm going to select company name here and change the display name to customers. And then I'll select contact name and change the display name to contact. Save my changes, and that change has now been saved to the screen. So I can make changes to the design of the screen while it's running, go back and forth while the application's actually running. Now, why are these underlined? They're underlined because they are summary properties. If I go back into LightSwitch and open up the customers table and then call up my properties window, which I need, if I select customer, there it is, the summary property is company name. LightSwitch will use the first string that it finds as the summary property. The summary property is the link here that when I click it, LightSwitch goes out and gets the details for that customer. In this case, the first string is the company name, so that makes a great summary property. We'll see later on how you can change the summary property if you want. Okay, so I've now built, very quickly, the makings of a LightSwitch application. Do I want to do more? Yep, there's one last thing I want to do. Okay, so let's go back in here. And notice I created this customer list screen. I created this screen that displays the customers. But when I click a customer, here's a screen that shows me the details. So if a screen doesn't exist for showing details, LightSwitch will create one on the fly. Okay? Now, that's great, but what I want is my own screen for looking at customers. So I'm going to create a second screen here, and I'm going to create a details screen for customers. I'll call it customer detail. I want it to be the default detail screen, so I'm telling LightSwitch, when you bring back a single customer, use this screen instead of the one that you would build yourself. And I also want to see orders. Is that right? That's right. Okay. So let's run this. Okay, here's my list of customers. And when I select a customer, here's the screen I created, customer details on the top, and orders down here. Now notice that order appears twice. Order appears twice because anytime you show a collection of items, LightSwitch is automatically going to display the summary property. And the summary property for orders is the order ID. There are no strings in here, so it uses the first integer, which happens to be the order ID. So I don't need the summary property order and then the order ID field. So I'm going to come into design screen. I'm going to get rid of order ID since I've already got it in there. And then I'm going to say I want order date, but then I want the course to appear next, so I'll move that up. And then I want the course date to appear next. I forgot to move those when I created the screen. And I'll save. And now these changes have been saved here. And of course, they're going to be saved for every customer that I look at, because what I've really done is I've saved these changes for good. If I come back into the customer detail screen at design time, notice that those changes are saved. Okay. So, what have we done? What have we built? Believe it or not, we built this. We built a multi-tier Silverlight 4 application that uses the patterns, practices, and architecture that you would expect a professional developer to use. MVVM and RIA services and entity framework. And the application's broken out into the client tier and the middle tier that runs all the validation logic and talks to the data. And then the data access, we used SQL Server, but we could also use SQL Azure, we could use SharePoint, we could use custom RIA services. This application right now is running only on my desktop as an out-of-browser Silverlight application. But as we'll see later on when we look for deployment, I can host it also on IIS 7 or in Windows Azure. Now, the end-user developer looks at this slide and says, whatever. But we as the IT guys, as the professional developers, know that in this simple application I just built, that is what I built. Now, let's go back to our scenario. The bank branch builds the application in LightSwitch, and the IT guy rests easy at night knowing that this is what they built. Knowing that when it comes time to deploy that application, he calls up the branch manager and says, send that application to me or put it on a share. He downloads it, he opens it up in Visual Studio, maybe tweaks a little bit of the validation logic, maybe makes a couple changes, and then deploys it to IIS 7 or to Azure. Does this in a couple of days. The deadline was the end of the month. It takes much less time than that. The branch manager's a hero. The IT guy's a hero. Everybody's happy. Okay. But wait, there's more. All we've done now is described our data and built some screens. Let's go back and finish building out this application. I want to add some business logic, obviously. I'm going to need additional screens. I'm going to want to create my own queries. And then we're going to add an ecosystem component, that Bing map control. And that's what we're going to do in the next demo, in the next stretch of the talk. And I've got some additional slides. I'm going to go over these slides very quickly before I go back to the demo as kind of a here's what we're going to see, and you can also treat them as notes that you can refer back to. So we've talked about entities. That's the data. It can be local. And right now, when I build this application, I'm using SQL Server Express locally. But at deployment time, I can use SQL Express or SQL Server. Actually, let me back up. We pointed to SQL Server data, but the application itself is using SQL Server Express. When we create our own tables later on, those will live in SQL Server Express. The data can also live in SQL Azure, SharePoint, RIA services. We looked at the custom business types. We're going to see in the demo that they provide validation and formatting. We'll have the ability to create, at the entity level, a calculated property. So for orders, we're going to want to see the total cost of an order. So we're going to do that ourselves. We can create relationships both within data sources and across data sources. And then we can write validations at the entity level, so at the customer or order level, or at the individual property level, like the order date or course date or price. We looked at the types of screens. Screens are always based on a query. So our customer list screen was based on essentially select star from customers, but there's always a query back there. You can let LightSwitch build the query for you, or you can create your own. We looked at screens. We saw the screen designer. We saw that you can modify the screens at design time and runtime. But when I said that we built a Silverlight application, maybe a little voice in the back of your head said, wait a minute, that's the screen designer and you built the Silverlight application? Where's the XAML? LightSwitch does not expose the XAML to the end user developers. It's meant to be the simplest way to build business applications. How many of these end user developers want to be staring at XAML, right? We think none of them. So LightSwitch does not expose the XAML at design time. Now, at runtime, obviously, it generates XAML and it generates the screens, but all the end user developers see, all the LightSwitch developer sees is this, the hierarchical view of what controls are on here. Now you're saying to yourself, oh, I don't like that. I need to be able to tweak the XAML. I need to be able to add things to the screen. Get yourself Visual Studio, create your own Silverlight controls. You can easily use them inside a LightSwitch application. Okay? And again, Beth will show you how to do that in her talk. Okay, we saw, we're going to look at queries. Queries bring back a collection. Queries bring back an individual item. We'll be able to sort, filter, add parameters. We'll be able to create our own queries. We'll be able to base queries on other queries. And let's go do it. C. Okay. So we've got customers right now. I'm going to build a screen that gives us the ability to create new orders. So I'll add a screen. It's going to be a new data screen for orders. And I will call this new order. Okay, and I want the customer to be after the order date, and then the course, and then the course date. All right, so let's run this. I meant to do new customers. All right, we'll do that next. Yeah, you know what? Let's do it now. I got so excited I skipped a step of the demo. While we're in here creating new screens, let's create a new screen for customers. So I'll call this new customer. Now I have the option of also being able to enter an order for a customer when I create that customer. So if I wanted to, I could do that. I'm going to choose not to. Okay, perfect. All right, now let's run this. Okay, so let's create a new customer, and the company name will be Tech Ed Enterprises. The contact is Robert Green, and the address is, where are we? Conference Center, Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Phone number 5. Now when I tab off that, notice that it is highlighted in red, and I immediately have a validation error because 5 is not a valid phone number. When I changed phone number from string to phone number, I get the benefit of built-in validation. LightSwitch knows what a phone number is supposed to look like, and 5 doesn't look like a phone number. And then over here, if I highlight this, I get a little drop-down arrow, and when I click that, I can see, oh, that's what a phone number is supposed to look like. There's supposed to be an area code, and then a local number, and possibly an extension. And now that's a valid phone number. Same thing for fax. And if I enter R.O. Green as the email, I also get a validation error because that's an invalid email address. And I can't save this data until I fix this error. Okay, so I'll enter the email address. It doesn't correct for spelling mistakes, but it does correct for the actual format. And now I could save this customer, or I can just discard it. So the built-in business types give me some built-in validation. Now let's create a new order. And when I select customer, notice, unfortunately, that they're not in alphabetical order. They are in customer ID order, but they're not in alphabetical order. I'd like to fix that. Same thing with courses. The courses are not in alphabetical order either. So let's go change that. Okay. Actually, let me check to see if the customers are in alphabetical order, because they're typically not supposed to be. They are. Okay. Good. All right, now, if I want to change the order that things appear, so for example, for customer list, I could come over here where it says customers and edit the query, and then I could choose to filter, so maybe I only want to see customers in a particular country. I can choose a sort order, so I could say company name ascending, and that query lives at the screen level. But for new order, I don't have the ability to do that. So what I can do is create a query outside of the screen and then use that in the screen. And the benefit of that is I now have a query that I can use in other places. So I'm going to right-click customers and add a query. And I will call this customers by company name, base it on customers, and then just say these should be sorted by company name. And then I'm going to create a courses query, right-click on courses, add a query, call it courses by name, and there again say sort by course name. Now, when we're creating a new order, I only want to see current courses. I don't want to see any courses that have been retired. So I'm going to create another query on courses, but what I want is a query where only the courses that haven't been retired show up, and I also want them to be sorted by course name. So rather than create a separate query, or rather than create a query from scratch, I'm going to create a new query called current courses, and I'm going to base it on courses by name. So that way, the course names are already in alphabetical order. And I'm going to add a filter, and my filter is going to be where retired date is null. In other words, doesn't exist. Okay, so now I have queries. Back to my new order screen, I want to use these queries inside the new order screen. Well, queries are data, so I will add a data item, and I will add a query, and I'm going to select current courses, and then I'm going to add another data item, which is a query, and that is customers by company name. And then for customers, I come over here to choices, and I say rather than use the query that you were going to use customers by company name, and for courses, use my query current courses. Okay? All right, so now, when we run this, data comes up. I'm going to create a new order. Customers are in alphabetical order. Courses are in alphabetical order, and the courses that have been retired, which was the Silverlight 3 course and the SharePoint 2007 course, don't show up at all. Okay? All right, so then this course, let's set it for, I don't know, May 31st, and there's 20 attendees, and we're charging, I don't remember how much this course costs. It would be nice if the application defaulted to that. We can fix that in a second. But let's say it's $200. What's the total cost of this order? $4,000, says the man who can do math in his head. Wouldn't it be nice if LightSwitch, which may not be able to do math as well as you, but could probably do it faster, would also tell me? Okay, so we'll save this order. I hope I saved it. Doesn't matter. All right, so what I want is total price. Now, total price is not at the screen level. Total price is at the order level. So I go into the orders table, and then it occurs to me that this should live in the SQL Server database. So I call the SQL Server DBA, and I say, would you add a column to the orders table for me? And I'm not going to tell you the response, but it was basically along the lines of, I'm disinclined to do that for you. Fine. I'll add it myself, and I will call it total price. Now, notice the little calculator here. This is a calculated property. This is not going to live in the SQL Server database. I do not have the ability to modify the schema, but what I do have the ability to do is calculate locally this total price, which is money. And then I need to write some code, so it is a computed field. I click Edit Method, and the result is going to be the answer. And so I just type result equals attendees times price, and that will generate the total price. Okay. So now, let's go into the new order screen. Total price shows up because it's now part of the order entity, and I can just drag it onto here and run this. And now when I create a new order for customer Fabricam, the course is HTML5, and 10 attendees at 200, well, that's a little much, at 100, 100 attendees, the 200 even better. The total price is $20,000. Okay, and let's save this. Okay, LightSwitch displays the results to me again in the detail. Let's go into Fabricam and look at the list of all their orders. Wouldn't it be nice if total price appeared here as well? Okay, click Design Screen. Come into here, into the grid, excuse me. And I click Data Grid Row, and I click Add, and I grab Total Price, and I click Save, and there's the total price for each of the orders. Cool. Now, what I really want is right here for the customer to see year-to-date revenue. Okay? Let's go do that. That lives at the customer level. So I open up the customer's entity, and I'm going to create a calculated property in here called year-to-date revenue, which is money. And I'm going to write the code to do this. Well, so the first thing is I'll set result to 0, and then for each order in me, which represents the customer, dot orders, so the collection of orders for this customer, if the order's year, if the year of the order is equal to the year of today, then result equals result plus order dot total price. Okay? Now, who here is a developer? You're looking at that code and you're about to hurl, aren't you? You're saying, oh my God, you work for Microsoft and you write codes like that? Yow! Call your broker, sell the stock. But remember, LightSwitch is aimed at the end user developer. You're sitting in the audience going, well, you should use result plus equal and you should write a link query. How many of these end user developers do you think know link today? What a product if we expected them to know link. No, we don't expect them to know link. We're happy if they learn it, and if they want to learn it, we'll help them learn it. But this works just fine. Okay? So LightSwitch does not assume any particular level of knowledge. All code works. Okay. Now, sorry, yes?
For sure the code works, but you said you can later deploy it worldwide. This will not work if you have millions of rows in it. So is this a part that you need to...
An excellent question. The question is, yeah, the code works, but if you deploy it later on worldwide and you have millions of rows, now you have a well-architected, poorly performing application. What do you do then? That would be an example of where the IT guy with Visual Studio would open this up, look at that code, fix it, make it more performant, or maybe actually change the screen so it doesn't return this many rows, or would maybe on the screen have some kind of paging, because LightSwitch has built-in paging, and you can set the paging. So you could tweak it that way, right? Eventually, though, if you're going to I mean, the link query would be better than doing the for loop, right? Because the link query is then going to send out a where clause to the back end. So yes, anything performance-wise is going to be better than this, for sure. Okay, then what I also want in here while I'm in here is a full address calculated property, which is going to be, and this is for the map control, address, me.address plus space plus me.city plus, I'm not sure if I need the comma. I don't think I do. Me.region. Okay. Good. Now, let's open up our customer details screen. Let's take, year-to-date revenue and drag it under email. And then let's run this. And now, when we select a customer, there's the year-to-date revenue. Okay. Now, notice we've gotten well into this talk, and we've written not a heck of a lot of code, very simple code. But now we're going to have to write some more code, because one of the things we need to do is start validating. Okay, so let's open up courses. And I want to do some validations here. So something like price. At the minimum, I want to be able to declare minimum and maximum values. Notice that these are grayed out, though. Because this is a SQL Server database and it's attached, I don't have the ability to specify those rules as properties. So I'm going to have to write some code. So I come out to here, and there is a Write Code button. And if I click the drop down there, I see a number of methods. At the property level, I can write code when the value is changed. I can write code to return true if it's read-only. And I can write code to validate it. So I'm going to click price validate. And then I'm going to add this code here. If the price is less than $250, pop up an error. If the price is more than $2,500, pop up an error. And then I want some validation on the retired date, because I don't want you to be able to retire a course with less than a 90-day lead time. Okay? And then I want some validation at the orders, on the order table. So for course date, I'm going to write some code in the validate. And that code is this. If the course date is less than 7 days from now, that's an error. You can't schedule a course less than 7 days in advance. And I also need that at the order date level as well. So I need to validate both course date and order date. And then I'm going to add this code here. When I change a course, when I go into the new order screen and I pick a course, I'm going to go find that course, get its price, and set the price of the order to the price of the course. So I'm going to default the order price to the cost of the course. And then I'm going to calculate 80% of that. And then, when it comes time to save this, I'm going to check to see if the price on the order is less than 80% of the cost of the course, because if so, I'm going to pop up an error because we don't accept discounts of more than 20%. Okay, so now I'm going to need to be able to work with courses, so I need a couple additional screens, which I'll just create very quickly. I need a screen that will show me a list of courses, and I'm going to base this screen on courses by name because I want it automatically sorted. So I'll call this course list. Okay, and that's all I need for now. Let's run this. Okay, look at our courses. And let's select any course, Introduction to LightSwitch. And for a limited time, this course is free. Guess what? No, it's not. There's a validation. Price must be at least $250. Oh, you're right. LightSwitch is the greatest product ever, and it should be $25,000, which also leads to an error because price can't exceed $250. Okay, so we'll set it back to what it was. And then we're going to retire this tomorrow because we're done. Nope. That's also a validation issue. Course requirement requires at least a 90-day lead time. So earlier we saw validations from using the built-in business types. I can also write code to do validation. Let's create a new order. Choose a customer. Blue Yonder Airlines. They want to take the LightSwitch Beyond the Basics course. Notice the price is now filled in at $250. 10 attendees, $2,500. I go to save this. Uh-oh. two validation issues exist, and those validation issues are that the order date and the course date default to the same thing, and courses can't be scheduled less than 7 days in advance. All right, well, we'll have this on June 1st, and we're going to give you a big discount, cut it to $100. I still have a validation issue because I can't have discounts of more than 20%. The minimum price is $200. And if I had thought about it, I would have written the code somewhere to set this to 200, but I didn't, so I have to manually do that. Now, I can save this with the maximum discount. Okay. All right, so far we've been working with SQL Server data, courses, customers, orders. Well, it turns out as a sales rep, I go and visit my customers, and I need to keep track of that. So again, I call the DBA and I say, would you add a table to the database? And his answer is, I wasn't going to add columns to individual tables. What makes you think I'm going to add an entire table? Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I will create my own table then. I right-click on Data Sources, and I add a table. Now this table is going to be stored locally on my computer in SQL Express. So I'm going to have some data in SQL Server, some data in SQL Express. And I'm going to call this visit. What do visits have? Visits have a date, which I'll make a date. That is required. Visits have a purpose. That's a string that's required. Visits have notes. Maybe that's not required. And I don't ever want to see the ID on the screen. I just want to see the date and the purpose. Now the purpose, I could leave it as a string, but it turns out there are only a handful of reasons that I go visit customers. I could make a separate table of purposes. What I can also do is make this a choice list. So if it's a D, I went for a demo. If it's S, I went for a sales call. If it's R, I went for relationship building. Okay? Perfect. Now, I want to create a relationship, a one-to-many relationship between customers and visits. Okay? What I've just done, this is really, really cool and a unique feature of LightSwitch. I've created a one-to-many relationship between the data living in SQL Server out on the network and the visits living in SQL Express on my laptop. To LightSwitch, data is data. It can create the relationship. It just brings the data down and it manages the relationship. So I have federated relationships across data sources. My SQL Server data is in training courses data. My local data is in application data, currently living on my laptop, so backing up is up to me. Now when I deploy this, I would probably take this visits and move it to another SQL Server database living somewhere so I could back it up. Just need to remember that when the SQL Server database training courses data gets backed up, these visits, of course, don't. Okay, now I'm going to create a screen for visits. I want a new data screen for visits. And I will call this new visit. Okay, I don't want customer ID. I should have gone into visits and said never show this. So in the future I won't see that. For now, I'll just delete it manually. And then I want customer up here. And for customer, I want these sorted alphabetically, so I'm going to once again add a query to this screen. It's the benefit of creating reusable queries is that you can use them on multiple screens. Okay, then what I'm also going to do is create another screen. Okay, and this is going to be a list and details screen based on customers by company name, and I want to see visits. So here's my screen where I can select a customer and see the visits. So I'll call that customer visits. Okay, click OK. Now in here, I've got customers in a list, then all these details, and then the visits. So I don't want most of this information. All I really want is the contact name and the phone number. So I'm going to delete everything in here except contact name and phone number. Okay, and then right now, the customers are on top. The customers are on the left, then the details, then the visits. This is a columns layout by default. I'm going to change it to a rows layout, so it'll be customers in a list, then the contact name and the phone number, and then the visits below. And this list, the display name, I don't need it to be customers by company name. It can just be customers. Now, that type of thing I could have done at runtime. So some of the screen configuring I'll do at design time. Some of the screen configuring I'll do when I'm running click design screen. Most things, a lot of things I can do either way. Okay, so let's add a visit. And the customer is Coho Winery. The purpose is demo or sales or relationship. So we'll say demo, and I'll say showed them LightSwitch. They want everyone trained ASAP. Of course they do. Okay. Click OK. Now, when I go to Coho Winery, that was the order screen. If I click the customer visit screen, here's a list of customers, and I can see below each of the visits. Now, wouldn't it be nice if I could also see where these guys are? So, like right here, I mean, think about it. There's a whole bunch of wasted screen real estate here. I would like to see a map of where these guys are. Now, I have no idea inside LightSwitch. Inside LightSwitch, you can't create a map control, but if you have Visual Studio, you can create a Bing map control. And if you're interested in doing that, you can download the LightSwitch training kit from MSDN, and there's a hands-on lab that will create the Bing map control extension. So that's what we did here. Let's install that. Oh, cool, it's already installed. So I would come into the properties here, go into extensions. Wait a minute, it's already installed. And why doesn't it show up? Exit, come back in, open up my application. Go into properties. What did I do? That's going to make... All right, well, I'm going to browse for extensions online. Oh, there it is. It's installed. Right, it's disabled. Okay. But what I could also do, actually, is go out to the Visual Studio Gallery, because I think we put this up there. Is that right? Are you searching? If I select Online Gallery and type Bing Map Control, no, I guess not. I thought we had it out there. All right, well, at any rate, let me enable the one that I already had. Visual Studio restarts with the project still open. I go into Properties, I go to Extensions, I say I want to use the Bing Map Control here. Now it's enabled. And now I'm going to go back into my customer visits, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this rows layout for the list to a columns layout, and then what I'm going to do right here is put the Bing map control. But first, I need full address. So I'm going to drag full address to here. Sorry, I keep doing that. And then I'm going to say use the Bing map control instead of a string. And now the Bing map control needs the Bing Maps key. So I go out to the Bing Maps portal, create an account if I don't have one. If I do have one, sign in. Go and view my keys. And here's my key. Copy that. Paste it in here. Run this. And now when it's time to go visit a customer, I want to know what did I do beforehand and where are they? I tried to make that vertical, but it wound up being below, but that's okay, I can fix that later. But as I select each customer, it shows me on a map where they are. I could go into design screen and get rid of this label. I don't need it to say full address, so I can just set the label position to none. And then, oh, I think this isn't actually inside the columns layout, but that's okay. I could fix that back in design mode, but you get the point. So if I can get a hold of that extension, whether I purchase it from a third party or I download it because somebody made one and put it up in the gallery, then I can easily integrate that into LightSwitch. Okay, so this app is in pretty good shape right now, methinks. There's probably a couple more things we want to do in the remaining 13 minutes to go. One is I might want to control who can do what. Right now it's a total free-for-all. You fire up the application, you can do anything you want. Understanding, of course, that the SQL Server database might have something to say about that. But inside the application, I might want to control access. And LightSwitch supports both authentication and authorization. Authentication is where you identify yourself. Authorization is where LightSwitch figures out what you're allowed to do. So LightSwitch supports both Windows and Forms authentication. Windows authentication says you've logged onto the network, you're clearly okay, therefore you can use the LightSwitch application. Forms authentication says you log on to the application itself as manager, user, Robert, whatever. Okay? So authentication is who are you, authorization checks permissions. Permissions are defined by the developer at design time, and then when you deploy the application, you identify the application's administrator. The administrator then creates users, if necessary, and roles. And roles have permissions. So you assign permissions to roles, users to roles, and then the users have all of the permissions that are specified for that role. Okay? So let's actually, at this point, pop back to demo and add a little access control to this. Okay. So let's add access control, then I'm going to go do another cool feature, then we're going to deploy. All right, so I want to define properties. So I'm going to double-click properties here, or of course I can go to project properties, and I'll go to access control, and I'm going to specify whether or not I want authentication. And for our purposes here, we'll use Windows authentication. There's automatically a security administration permission, but I'm going to add a can modify orders permission, which means you can add, update, and delete orders. And then I can choose whether or not this is granted for debug. So I can run the application with the permission, I can run the application without the permission. Okay, so let's leave this unchecked for now, and we'll see what happens if you don't have that permission. Now what I need to do is I need to check for permissions, because I've created the permission, but that doesn't mean in my code somewhere or in the application somewhere I need to check if the user can take the action. So at the orders level, in the orders entity, if I expand write code, there are a number of access control methods like can delete, can insert, can update. So can delete returns true if you are allowed to delete and false if you're not. So I'm going to say result equals me, meaning the order entity dot application dot user dot has permission, and then there is a set of permissions, and in there is can modify orders. So if this returns true, then I can delete. And if it returns false, then I can't. And then what I want is similar things for inserting and updating. Okay, now let's run this. And I have unchecked this permission, so I'm going to run this application without the ability to modify orders. Okay, the application loads. I click New Order, and I select a customer, and I select a course, and I remember that the course date has to be at least 7 days from now, and I enter attendees, and I click Save, and now I'm told I'm not able to add orders. That's not exactly user-friendly now, is it? So let's be a little kinder to our users. And at the new order screen level, let's put code in the can-run method. Because if you can't enter new orders, you shouldn't be able to run the new order screen in the first place. So me, which is the application, .user.has permission, permissions dot can modify orders. Okay. Now, when I run this and I don't have permission to modify orders, now when the application runs, there is no new order menu item. And if I call up a customer, I can look at the orders, but I cannot add, edit, or delete. Okay? And then, of course, at an application level, you may have a number of permissions. You can add as many as you need and then check them in the code. You can get quite sophisticated here if you want. Okay, one other piece of information we want. Courses have notes, and it turns out that the course notes are stored in a SharePoint site internally called training courses. And here's a list called course notes, and I'd like to be able to see these notes inside my application. No worries. I just right-click on data sources, I add a new data source, and this time I say SharePoint. Then all I need is the address of the SharePoint site. Which I could have just copied from the browser, or I can type myself. LightSwitch goes out, queries SharePoint, brings back a list of the lists, and I say I want course notes, and I want this in SP training courses data to identify as from SharePoint. I click Finish, and here's course notes with title, course number, and notes. Title, course number, and notes. And then a bunch of other information that is brought back, which is very useful to LightSwitch behind the scenes, but I don't necessarily want any of my users looking at, like created by or modified by. So I'm just going to make these all not visible by default. And then what I'm going to do is create another relationship, a one-to-many relationship between courses in SQL Server and course notes in SharePoint based on the course number, which is shared between the two of them. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is create a, I don't have a course detail screen yet, so there we go. The last piece of our puzzle here is a course details. Do I want it to be, let's just check. Yep, details. I want it to be course, and I want it to include course notes. And then I know that the course notes and the title are going to be the same because, again, if I look at course notes in here, the summary property is the first string, which is the title. So I know now that in my course detail, that down in this grid, title is going to be duplicated, so I'll delete that, and then I'll change course notes to say title, which is what it appears like in SharePoint, and that's good enough. And now, when this comes up, when I select a course, and I open it, here is the course, and here is the information from SharePoint. Notice that it's read-only. You're only allowed to edit data from one place at a time, and in here, the main data source is courses, but if I click on this and display the detail, then I can make a change to this. So right now it says LightSwitch Team Blog has good explanation of access control. LightSwitch Team Blog has good explanation of access control. Really good explanation of that. Click Save. Shift back over to SharePoint. Refresh. And it changed. So I can now, from here, add. I'd have to make a new course notes screen, but I could add course notes as well. Okay, so we're almost done. One last thing, which I'll just review quickly, is deployment options. And I touched on this early on when I did the architecture slide, but just to review, I have actually 5 choices for how I want to deploy this application. I can deploy it as a 2-tier desktop application, meaning it runs on my laptop. And that means, technically, it's an out-of-browser Silverlight application being hosted locally. All the data, the visits data, customer visits are on my desktop. The application database is on my desktop in SQL Express. And I'm still talking to the SharePoint and the SQL Server data. Or I could deploy it as a 3-tier desktop application where the user interface runs on the user's computer, but the middle tier logic is hosted on IIS or Azure, and then the data lives where it lives. I can create that as an in-browser or I'm talking about desktop? Okay. A 3-tier desktop application is an out-of-browser Silverlight application hosted in IIS or in Azure. And then the third option, the fourth and fifth options are as a 3-tier web application where it's an in-browser application, which means I can't export to Excel, I can't write code to control Word, I can't talk to local resources like scanners and printers and whatnot. It's an in-browser application hosted on IIS or Azure. And the way I do all of that as the developer is I just come into Properties, and I go to Application Type, and I click Publish, And then this publish wizard will take me through all of the questions. Is this a client, desktop, or web app? Where's it going to be hosted? Where does the output go? Or if it's a web app, do you want to immediately deploy it on IIS if you have the web deployment tool installed? Or do you want to create an MS deploy package, which is then imported into IIS? Where's the database? Where's the authentication? If you're going to host this in Azure, then you, of course, need an Azure account, but then it walks you through the steps. So I'm not actually going to do any of that. I'll just point out the things you can do. There's some really good information on this on the Visual Studio Team blog and pointers to it from the LightSwitch Developer Center. So that, my friends, is LightSwitch. LightSwitch is the simplest way to create business applications for the desktop and the cloud. Primary audience, end user developers, pro developers will love it as well, because they can build applications quickly. They can also extend and modify the applications that the end user developers build. It gives us the three things that we wanted the developers to have when they went off and built that hardware asset application in the first place. Smooth on-ramp to development, built-in plumbing, simple and flexible deployment. So basically, the IT guy gives the end user developer LightSwitch, and that person is going to build architecturally the same type of application that the pro dev would have built if he or she had had time. That is what LightSwitch does. Next steps, download Beta 2, go to the Developer Center on MSDN, check out the LightSwitch team blog. If you want more labs, you can download the LightSwitch training kit. Email me with any questions you have. I have posted the demo script I used today, as well as instructions on how to create the SQL Server database and the SharePoint site to my blog. So if you want to play along and do what I did here, that's on my blog. There's my Twitter account. Dev 354 is Beth Massey's session. She'll go beyond what we've done today. There's a LightSwitch lab, which is very similar to what we did now down at the hands-on lab. And then I'll be at the LightSwitch product demo station certainly tonight, and then during the conference. If you want to come talk to me, email me and I'll tell you what hours I have. You can also, I think you can find it on the MyTechEd if you can look up other people's stuff. And there you go. Thank you very much. Hope you learned a lot. Have a great show.